Welcome again to another episode of Toffee TV USA. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Williams, along with my co-host, James Boyman, here to bring you stateside views on Everton Football Club. In that spirit, we thought, at least for this episode, we would channel our inner stat heads and try and take a more analytical look at Everton and some of the recent performances, especially compared to how well we performed earlier in the year. For those of you who have listened to the American Toffee podcast in the past, it is something we like to do. I will say this. I know that's kind of an American tradition, starting with baseball being probably the biggest stats-oriented sport, but we recognize soccer is a very fluid sport. It's not all down to the numbers. So if you're going to respond to us, hey, try watching the game, I can assure you we do, and we watch a lot of them. But I think it's important to take somewhat of an objective viewpoint at things, and stats, analytical information is just that. It's just additional information, but we like taking a look that way. Sometimes you could see things in the numbers that maybe your eyes don't see. So with that being said, we decided to pull up some figures and just kind of take a look and see if there's anything in there that really would identify more discreetly some of the problems Everton's having in the past three matches. Obviously, they haven't gone well. We haven't scored a lot, haven't created a lot of chances, and we haven't really defended very well. So although what we did find was there aren't as many glaring kind of numerical things that I would expect. James, I think the first thing that we thought about was, and I think concerns coming into the season was, we bought a couple aged players. Guys like James and Alon are more instinctual players. You're not necessarily relying on sheer athleticism. I think we had a little bit of concern on movement going into the season. And so we looked at those numbers, and I thought it'd be interesting maybe for you to kind of walk through some of the things that we saw. It does look like Richarlison in particular was so important to our attacking movement. Maybe you could walk down some of those numbers. I think it does tell us something.
Yeah, I mean, it'll come as no surprise to anyone who does watch Everton that Richarlison left a gaping hole in the side in his absence, and we really struggled to fill it. And I think it'd be easy to say we lost Richarlison, and that's why we've struggled so much the last few matches. But I think, and that may be totally valid, but I think if you look into the numbers a little bit, there's some additional conclusions that you can kind of draw from that. And so worth noting up front that movement is one of the more difficult aspects of the game to analyze from a numerical standpoint. But if you look at something like progressive runs, for example, the amount of times a player's running forward with the ball, we were 12th in that metric. So we're also 16th in offsides, which perhaps could indicate that we're not being quite aggressive enough with making those incisive runs in behind the defensive line. Again, it's not a great measure, but if you look at players who are in the top 25 for progressive runs per match, the only player that we have is a Richarlison, who makes about 3.78 per 90, so a little under 4 progressive runs per 90. Below him, you almost have a full drop off with Alex Iwobi, who hasn't played that much for us, but he's at 2.88, and then you've got Seamus Coleman coming in at 2.05. So when you've got your top two being offensive players, your third being a defender, I think that says quite a bit about the amount of contribution we've been getting from some of the other players in those attacking roles.
Yeah, it's a massive drop off, but what's even more crazy, and let's define, I was going to do this, but let's define progressive run too, because, you know, I've had some discussions on Twitter with people about some of these labels, and progressive run isn't just taking a run forward, really. It is defined. So we pulled these particular numbers from Y Scout. So a run is considered progressive if the distance before the starting point and the last touch of the player is at least 30 meters closer to opponent's goal if starting and finishing points are in own half, at least 15 meters closer to opponent's goal if starting and finishing points are in different field halves, and at least 10 meters closer to opponent's goal if starting and finishing points are in the opponent's half. So naturally, you've got some different weights there so that you can kind of compare and contrast wingbacks who tend to go and run longer distances, and you don't punish someone who's a very active forward like Richarlison, who's already closer to goal. I mean, there's only so much distance the guy can run. It's worth noting that. So people in the analytic community, when we say progressive runs, that's what we mean. It's not just people that run. It does measure activity. Movement, yes, I agree. you need to be there at the match. Ideally, if you're watching it on video, you prefer to not have a Premier League feed that has this sort of narrow field. If you watch like BN Sports, they have some big ones. I watch a lot of Liga MX, wider views. So not to belabor the point, but that really means nothing unless you kind of compare it to other clubs. So I thought it was interesting to look at a couple of the more successful attacking clubs. And so we found some stuff that was pretty dramatic. I mean, Man City, for example, I think we found 10 players higher than Seamus Coleman. We only have 2, and Iwobi doesn't play that often or hasn't. That's pretty dramatic. So you think, okay, well, what about a team like Liverpool, another good attacking side? Yeah, they've got 8. So I think the summary here is they're just numbers, right? I don't want to oversell what the numbers are. I know you don't either, but it's at least some objective indication that says, maybe we're not active enough, especially in attack or from the back going forward. I know Carlo has liked having width provided by fullbacks in the past that are aggressive, and we're not seeing that much. But really, when you take Richarlison out, who's far and away our best, and Iwobi's not playing, for better, for worse, even Coleman was out for a while. It's hard to not look at this team and think sometimes, we just need legs. And I think part of that may be the call for Anthony Gordon. I don't know if he's really the answer there, but at least I get that. Bernard's okay too. I think he's at 1.9 and Dean has some. But yeah, we just need legs and more movement. I think that is definitely part of things, especially if you're going to have a player like James. And last episode, we talked a lot about Isco and the value he could provide. And we all agree is fantastic, but you got to have legs around him. That's something we really need to think about. That can be created through tactics or just different personnel. So I'm beating the point into the ground. It's difficult to measure something like that, but it's an interesting indicator. And I wonder if that's something we need collectively. And Richarlison's absence was definitely missed in terms of impetus and attacking impetus, especially on that left side. I think it's very important. That being said, we took a look at some other factors too. We just kind of looked at passing too and how aggressive we are. Overall for the season, our passes into the final third are only 10th. Passes into the penalty area are 12th. That's frankly just not good enough. But we didn't really see any decline necessarily in the past 3-4 matches, James. So we kind of started looking at buildup. And I think the measures weren't so good, but at least some of the other analytical products we did look at, there was some big differences between the beginning of the year and in the last 3 matches.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the sort of pass maps and the network of interconnectedness amongst the players on the field, they're pretty terrible the last few matches,
Yeah.
like really bad.
Ugly.
And it should come as no surprise when people are talking about Gylfi Sigurdsson, who's been criticized relentlessly, but you look at the number of passes that he receives forward, not that many. And then when he doesn't turn often and continue to play the ball forward, much more often is going backwards, which again, the eye test will tell you, but the stats clearly back that up. And it's just not good enough. And then you put a player, for example, against Newcastle, Andre Gomez, in that attacking role. It's not really his strong suit either. And so we're left with this weird no man's land. And as we're approaching the opposition goal, we're left with very little aggressive players who are looking to slide that ball through. And furthermore, as we just mentioned, no players that are looking to run in behind to also be on the receiving end of a pass like that.
Yeah, soccer is a fluid match. Football is a fluid game. I get it. We are American, folks. We got to be genuine, true to ourselves, I guess. Yep. We blame the English for that, though. They gave us the name. So anyway, yeah, it all kind of works together, but the pass maps are awful. You're right. I mean, it's really the network is our center backs passing it back and forth from each other and working out to the different wings and the fullbacks. Yeah, it looks awful. And you can tell there's just no central penetration. Now, some of it is hard. Like Southampton does an amazing job taking their center mids and smashing them together. But we knew that going into the match. So there's other ways you can create space in the final third to break through defenses and cut through lines. I think one of the things that was really interesting, we also looked at touches in the offensive aspect of the game. It's unbelievable how few we had in the defensive third the last 2 matches. When you think about a team that's attacking often and being successful, you wouldn't expect that. But you kind of wonder, maybe we're not being patient enough in the buildup. Now, we talked obviously about the lack of touches up forward, but I do kind of wonder in the buildup, maybe we are, defensive teams will pack it in against us and condense the space in the final third. So perhaps that's something where we can be more patient and try and draw them out and be better at moving the ball and moving the ball more quickly. Anyway, there are a couple different aspects here. I do think though they all work together though, don't they?
Yeah, they all work in conjunction, and I think the point about maybe being a little impatient in the buildup. I think that's fair. We're playing against a club like Manchester United most recently, who we know don't pressure very
No,
aggressively.
they don't.
And so in some ways it's about finding the balance. Like you can't, if a team's going to let you sit back, you can't afford to just sit back and play around with the ball in your half the entire match. You have to go at them to some extent. So maybe that's a reflection of why we didn't have as many passes around the back. But at the same time, you do have to kind of move the ball side to side and look to draw the defense out and then exploit the opposite side. Teams that want to compact centrally, like Southampton, again, you have to create width to draw them, to get them out of shape and be able to exploit those opportunities. But even then, if you look at the touches, the distribution of the touches we're taking relative to the rest of the Premier League, we're frankly just kind of middle of the road. We're 11th in touches per 90 in the final third.
Right.
So, and then in 9th in touches per 90 in the penalty box. So not only are we not getting a ton of touches in the defensive third, but we're not really getting a ton of touches in the opposition danger areas. And so it seems like most of our possession is kind of coming in this middle no man's land without any kind of constructive intent coming from that. It's very meandering, I think.
Yeah, and I think the key there too is to say, all right, well, we do have some players that can unlock a defense, though, for sure. And so one thing that we did notice in terms of a trend in the last several matches was, well, first of all, Richarlison wasn't there. So there's obviously a decrease in terms of touches in one of your most dangerous players. But James Rodriguez has been consistently our most dangerous player this year with the ball. So one thing that I thought was pretty obvious is if you look at the number of touches that he had in the first 4 matches, what are we at? We're in between, very consistent, frankly, right? We're right in between 65 and 70 touches. And that's a lot for a player that in essence is playing an attacking role on the right side. So not coincidentally, Liverpool match, 55 touches, and he went 90. Southampton, who gives you space too. They pressure, but they pressure in the middle of the field. How many touches? 53 in 90 minutes. That's again, 65 was the lowest in the first 4 games, and we dropped down to 53 against a team that's going to concede some possession. And then you look at, obviously he was out for a match. Then you look at Manchester United doesn't pressure us. Granted, it was only 79 minutes, but he only had 55 touches there too, and was not as dangerous. He just didn't create as much. That's a problem, and it may be a sign that we're becoming more predictable. When you look at those pass match maps and the networks, James is in similar spots. In fact, I thought that very few moments when he was pulled over to the left, I actually thought we were more dangerous. We seemed to, his ability to switch the field and make accurate passes quickly, decisively. I mean, he was hitting Iwobi a couple times in dangerous spots. And I mean, we looked dangerous at that moment, dynamic in the final third, not talking about in transition. They were packed in and we still looked dangerous. We'll get to that in a second, how we can change the attack. But I wanted to transition a little bit into what I think is our bigger problem. I mean, ultimately, we're 6 unexpected goals in the season. So we are scoring our share a lot from set pieces. Yes, true. But really, the goals against is the big issue that we can see. And really, you're looking at expected goals against. We're 12th in the league. That is obviously not very good. But ultimately, it comes down to our defensive metrics. They're not very good. I mean, you're not seeing a lot of pressure. We can get to the discipline record as well. But if you're not going to pressure, you better be good at some other stuff. So I don't know if, James, you want to kind of start us through some of those. I think some of them are interesting. I don't think we see a massive difference throughout, in the last 3 games necessarily, but I think they're insightful nonetheless.
Yeah, no, I agree. And just one last point on the James touches, because I think it's really illuminating. I mean, you win games by getting your best players the ball. And you can say that
in dangerous areas too.
Yes, exactly. But even someone like James, who, as you mentioned, has the ability to kind of create or move the ball into dangerous areas with his ability to switch. It's the same for any sport. If you're an elite wide receiver in football, you want to get targets. You need to get those guys targets. So their metrics, their percentages they have a higher return on an average possession than your less effective players. So the fact that he saw such a dramatic decline, 10, 15 touches per match, and it just continued, shows me that it just wasn't coming off for him. And, there may be something there regarding, the injury that he's had, which we talked about on the last episode of the American Toffee podcast, but still you need to make him a focal point. And I think teams may be starting to catch on to the fact or catch on to how important he is for us and targeting him maybe more than they were in the first couple games. But again, as you said, let's get into some of the defensive side of the ball, some of the metrics there. So Ryan, before we go into it, would you mind just giving the people at home a quick rundown on PPDA?
Yeah, that's a good point. There are a couple metrics out there that don't necessarily measure effectiveness. They more measure the style of a team. So PPDA is, I guess we call it an advanced metric that Y-Scout uses. It's called passes allowed per defensive action. And so what's interesting is you're only calculating values in the opponent's final 60% of the pitch, but really it's just measuring defensive actions, tackles, interceptions. That's the denominator, and passes ultimately is the numerator. The idea is to measure high pressing intensity, really. You know what I mean? How much pressure you're putting on the opponent and how many passes you're in essence allowing them to make, because that's the measurement in their own half. It's not necessarily effectiveness. Shockingly enough, Leeds will be very high. No, I mean, Leeds actually does a little more. It's funny. They've actually pressured more in the middle of the pitch than they have high in the pitch. Another measure too is style is challenge intensity. That one's a little more intuitive, I think. It's really just kind of duels, tackles, interceptions per minutes of opponent's possession. And that one's really just a measure almost of how combative teams are. Now, Leeds is far and away number one in that one, of course. They're very aggressive. And I think our results in that, and this shouldn't be surprising, is we're 13th in PPDA. We don't press a lot high. And while we're third in the league in pressures, only 11th in attacking third pressures. So that's not necessarily bad. I mean, that's a structural component. There's nothing wrong with setting up your team in different ways. We're second in pressures in the middle third, but the pressure percentage, meaning as the success rate when we pressure an opponent, is 14th. So I got a little problem with that. So structurally, that's one thing if you're designed in a certain way and you're executing and you're achieving what you're trying to do. Recoveries is 12th as well, too. We have lots of tackles, but again, few in the attacking third. It doesn't mean we're not being that effective in it. Frankly, Allen and Decore are the ones, Decore with recoveries and Allen with tackles, that you expect, but it needs to still be a collective thing. And so it should not be any surprise that almost no defensive actions that we've taken have led to a shot attempt. I think we're last in the league in that regard. Again, that doesn't mean, Leicester and Liverpool are the top. That doesn't mean it's not the worst thing necessarily in the world. That's not really what we're trying to achieve. But I would assume if we're going to sit back just a little bit, and when they do kind of hit that middle third and we do start to pressure, that's fine. I would expect to see, if we're positioned well, us picking off a lot of passes, blocking passes. I would think we'd be very good at preventing progressive distance and helping with pass completion, but it doesn't look like it's playing out that way, does it?
No, it doesn't. And talking about these metrics, and you alluded to it, a lot of them sort of just reflect the style of play, but then there's other ones looking at just essentially indicate that while our style is clear, it's also clearly pretty ineffective in a lot of ways. And then you look at positioning, 16th in interceptions, 10th in passes blocked. So even though we're not pressing high. So in theory, if you're pressing high, you're extending your players. There's a lot more space to exploit. We're trying to sit relatively compact, but we're still not able to get in those passing lanes. And, we talk about a player like Allen, who I believe I saw a graphic the other day. I think he's like first in maybe the top 5 European leagues, maybe just the Premier League in overall tackles. And we know how disruptive he can be. But as you said, Ryan, it has to be a collective effort. And there's other players who are just frankly gigantic liabilities in that regard in terms of interceptions. Gylfi Sigurdsson's not intercepting a lot of passes. Andre Gomez isn't intercepting a lot of passes.
And never have.
So you bring in these two guys, Decore and Allen, who theoretically bring that sort of element to the side. But then our progressive distance against is 13th. Pass percentage against 14th. So we're really just kind of letting teams run riot and not disrupting their style of play. And we've, again, talked about it on the pod. If you want to check it out, please do. But in our previews, we've given detailed kind of breakdowns of what we can expect from opposition. Manchester United, we're going to attack down the left flank and try that all day. Southampton, kind of similar style of play. And we've been really, not only have we not been great at executing on our own style of play, we've been relatively poor at shutting down what the opposition wants to do.
Yeah, we're making it too easy for them. I think that's very obvious. And I almost feel a lot of it's lack of positioning, discipline. Carlos said after, especially the Manchester United match, we weren't compact. And you could see it. I mean, we did some video breakdown actually in our Discord, which is dull and monotonous, I'm sure, for some. But the point is you saw too much space in between the lines in terms of distance between the center back pairing and the midfield. And too much space in between players within the lines. It's just too easy to cut through. And in that particular team, you've got two danger guys, and it's obvious. And Rashford's going to come back to the ball. Bruno's going to come back to the ball. So if the other team knows where James is going to be half the time, he's not that tough to stop. He's still pretty good. The same thing should be for other teams. Rashford killed us. Bruno Fernandes killed us too. The point is, you know where they're going to be. And there was nothing surprising they did. Southampton, the same thing. So if we're not taking people out of what they do well and making them uncomfortable, you should expect to see results like this. And I think those metrics indicate some of that. I even think the discipline is spelled over a little bit, even though it's small sample size. It's not the best predictor of anything, into just kind of fouls. And I mean, so if you look at it, so we're 16th in the league in yellows. That's a lot of yellows. We've tied for the most reds. Do we lack discipline? Well, it's kind of funny because in the first 4 matches that we won, you know how many yellows we had? 2.
There you go.
So let's walk through the last 4 matches. 3 yellows, 2 yellows, 4. I know Merseyside Derby was one of them. We know lots of cards in that one. I get it. 2 red cards too. But you start to wonder, like, hey, look, if Richarlison doesn't slide into poor Thiago Alcantara, I hope he makes it back in time. I really do. I was being sincere. No, in all seriousness, if he doesn't take a red there, I think we have a chance to win that match, truly. And those are the things that matter. Now, if Luka Dean doesn't take a red, which I still think is a ridiculous red, do we come back and win that one? Probably not. I know, especially you were very disgusted with that one, and I agree with you. But that's not the point. The point is, and I think a lot of this stuff is really a byproduct of structural issues in the midfield. I think that's at least what I'm seeing. Whether it's Allen coming too high and leaving too much of a gap, whether it's our midfield not working well together to close the space in between them to allow them to push forward, whether our center backs are not pushing up high enough, and Mina and Keane are not the best, and they've been there the majority of time pushing up. You know, Mina's a little more comfortable pressing than Michael Keane is, but they have to work as a unit. And obviously you saw massive gaps between Holgate and Keane in the Manchester United match. So one thing I thought that was really interesting is we looked at team shape a lot. We always look at it when we look at matches and do our match reviews, but I thought it was very obvious. I thought Tottenham, I recall watching the match and thinking, wow, we have a great team shape. We really seem like we're playing the right way. We're taking them out of what they want to do. And then I see a match like Newcastle where it just, they were dangerous against us on the counter, which it was just totally flummoxed that was the case. So James, I know you're a big fan of kind of field position and that schematic and that kind of tool. So why don't you walk us through what we saw when we looked at our shape against Newcastle versus Spurs? Because I think it's very, very telling, especially in the midfield.
It is. And if you look at Spurs, the shape was in fact very, very good, very solid, very consistent, where you have the back 4. You've of course got Luka Dean and James Coleman, who are out wide, a little bit higher up the pitch. You've got the center backs holding it down, Michael Keane and Yerry Mina. Then you've got Allen sitting almost perfectly in the center in that sitting 6 role, as seems to be his best, but hasn't really achieved maybe what he's capable of the last few matches. You've got Doucouré and Andre Gomez slightly in front of him, sort of advancing that play, providing the link up. And then you've got 3 true forwards. You've got Richarlison out on the left-hand side, Calvert-Lewin pushed up even higher than either of them, and James slightly tucked in on the right-hand side. And again, this is average position. We know that he was kind of all over the place and typically is, but you really have that true authentic 4-3-3 shape that you would come to expect, compared with the Newcastle match where there were some personnel issues and some interesting choices. This was the infamous Christmas tree experiment. And it is a weird shape. And I wish we could show you. Hopefully in the next few episodes, we'll be able to show some graphics on the screen, but you've got this weird cluster over on the left-hand side of the pitch where you've got Andre Gomez, you've got Allen pretty isolated in the middle, and you've got Decore over on the right-hand side, excuse me. And then you've got right-hand side completely isolated. James is tucked almost perfectly in the center. It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. And you've got John Joe Kenny pushed up way higher than anyone else, providing the only width on the right-hand flank. Calvert-Lewin very isolated up top. So it just shows like the very disconnected style in that match. And frankly, that's why the match went the way it did.
I think the biggest tell there is, why is Allen's average position higher than Decore's?
Yeah.
I don't understand that at all. James is literally in the exact same spot for the most part as he was in the other match, yet it's a different formation. It's just a mess. And it's funny because you look at Spurs and you look at that position and you think, yeah, Coleman's back a little deeper. That's more Carlos style. He actually likes that asymmetrical back line where one fullback's pushed up higher than the other. You could see what they're doing. They're thinking, okay, look, we got to be compact in the middle. Allen's got to drop deep because Harry Kane likes coming back for the ball now, and Son is the one that runs behind. So Coleman's all over him. That makes sense to me. This Newcastle diagram, please go check it out if you can. You can get it on Who Scored in other places. It is astonishing, and we're so compact. And part of it's personnel too, because even if you're in that, like Gylfi's up top, even if he's in that dangerous spot, he's not going to receive the ball and do much with it either way. I think he had 5 shots that match and 14 giveaways.
Yeah.
I mean, that's hooray on the shots that were nowhere near scoring. I mean, you just can't do that. But anyway, I think what really is important is that begs the question going forward. What is the solution in the midfield? Clearly, we've gotten disjointed. It doesn't make sense. They seem out of shape. So I put a very quick poll on a couple weeks ago, and my idea was, what's the best immediate solution to Everton's midfield struggles? And I gave a couple different options. One was James sitting in front of, in the middle, Allen and Decore, with the in essence of being 4-3-3, but really 2 behind the 1, almost a 4-2-3-1. The other one was Allen and Decore as center mids, pushed up a little higher with the true defensive mid behind them. I had Godfrey there. It could be Fabian Delph too, honestly, depending on health. But Godfrey had played defensive mid a lot of his time growing up, especially on loan as well, even though it was lower league football. That's a position he's a more natural there than Mason Holgate, who played one time at Manchester United. He's a much better fit for it. And frankly, I think he's a little better with the ball, and his ball control skills are better too, personally. And then the other option was, let's just go 4-4-2. And it's very interesting because Carlo Ancelotti, both at Real Madrid with James and at Napoli with Allen, played a version of a 4-4-2. Right. Yeah. I'm channeling Charlie Stilitano there. But it was more like a 4-2-2-2. And basically what it had is a defensive midfield pairing. But at Napoli, Allen stayed a little farther back and allowed Ruiz, who's a lot of rumors on him right now. He's a wonderful player, but he plays a little bit similar to Decore. Maybe a little more skilled. Decore is maybe a little more athletic, but the idea is Allen kind of stayed a little bit behind, freeing Decore up, but they were both truly defensive mids. And Decore said that he likes defensive mid. Now he's going to be more active maybe than Allen, but there needs to be better discipline. So that's the idea, is those two sitting back there. And then the 2 in front could be James still on the right, playing more narrow, of course. And it could be anyone. It could be Richarlison on the left, although I don't know who we played Jank with DCL. Probably not. No. My man Iwobi could be on the left. Bernard could be on the left. Gordon even. You know what I mean? It'd be fine with Richarlison and Dominic Calvert-Lewin working up top. Anyway, there are a lot of different combos. And then there's an other column. So I believe the winner was actually Godfrey to defense center mid. I'd have to look at the poll response, but it was pretty close between that and James sitting up in front of Allen and Decore.
Yeah.
The other is a couple of people brought up, just put Andre back in there because, we've only lost once with him in there. I don't know if he was necessarily all that instrumental to those. Gylfi, I'm not entertaining any response for him in there. I just don't think he's a fit. I just don't think he's a fit anymore, honestly, James. I don't know. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on it, and what option would you choose, and how can we fix the midfield?
Personally, I just kind of subscribe to the idea of players at their best position. We all know that James is number 10 for a reason. That's where he's most effective. So why would you not put him there? The relentless insistence by Carlo Ancelotti to play Gylfi Sigurdsson week in, week out in that midfield is just so weird. And I know there's a precedent for playing James on the right because that's how he was mostly used at Madrid, but play him centrally. He drifts centrally anyway. And then you've got the resolve of Allen and Decore to kind of provide that steal behind him. He doesn't have to necessarily track back as much. And then you've got, I mean, I guess it raises the question of, well, who do you move out on the right instead? But I think with a front three of like Richarlison, Iwobi, and Dominic Calvert-Lewin playing in front of that midfield, you've got that steal in there. I think that would be my personal pick. But I also really like the idea of a 4-2-2-2 because I think, again, that gives you the right balance. You put those two defensive mids in there, but then you can offset that with more offensive players who are going to move the ball forward, drive the ball forward in Alex Iwobi and Bernard perhaps. And then you've got the duo of Richarlison and Calvert-Lewin as a strike partnership, which we saw work so well last season.
Yeah, I think those are all good takes and interesting combinations. I am also a little partial to just playing James in the middle. Now, he did it when Carlo played 4-3-3 at Real Madrid. James did typically play in the 10. I know sometimes he played out right and when Bale wasn't there, but he really only played out right for the most part in his 4-4-2, 4-2-2-2. Which is interesting too, because I've read lots of articles that said he played right all the time in the 4-3-3, but the research does not back that up, by the way. But yeah, I just think it makes us less predictable. If he can roam out all the different places, and I really believe, having played a little defensive mid myself, I think it's a lot easier to organize if you're a duo. I think communication's easier. And really, we need that chemistry between Allen and Decore to develop. And I think Allen just needs to be a little more disciplined. I'm great that he's leading the league in tackles. That being said, even though Allen came up most of his career as a defensive mid, his transition to more of a box-to-box midfielder was legit. And even if he's not a phenomenal athlete, he's comfortable with the ball, he's confident with it, and he is energetic. I have to admit, now if JP Boyman was healthy, and you know how much I loved him and how excited I was when we made the move to get him a couple years ago, if he's healthy, all bets are off. I would love to see how interesting it would be to put Allen and Decore in front of him and just let them run around like madmen and just destroy people and have Boyman sit there as a sitting six. I think that would be really interesting. Yeah. It would be really interesting and effective. Maybe not the most attack oriented, although Boyman can pass, but I got to wonder if maybe it's time is that a way to ease Godfrey into the side? He seems like he has a lot of the characteristics in that way. I'm concerned about him as a center back right away. Still think he's very raw. He got lit up at Norwich, made a lot of very immature mistakes, which, hey, he's young. I don't think it's a bad transfer necessarily. But it reminded me a lot of Holgate a couple years ago, where he was almost impulsive in some of the things he did, going to ground when he shouldn't have, maybe being slightly out of position. And we've seen his maturity. I don't know. They got to change something. No, I don't think Andre Gomes back into the fold is necessarily the right thing to do. But yes, in the immediate, I would probably put Allen and Decore behind James. It doesn't even matter. I actually think Iwobi looks better on the right for some reason. And maybe I'm distorted by watching how insanely crazy he played for Nigeria on the break. If you haven't watched that, audience, please go. It's every other pass is just some crazy trick. I think on the right side, he almost seems more disciplined, more direct. He almost maybe doesn't feel as compelled to create. He can sit back. He can use the space better. And he almost seems like he likes to play wider on the right. Well, Seamus Coleman's healthy. That's good for him because he likes to cut more in the middle into the half space rather than being a traditional wide kind of outside fullback. But yeah, I think, if you put a gun to my head, I would say the number one option is put Allen and Decore behind James and give that a roll and see how it goes. I am a little surprised, though, knowing that Carlo played at Madrid and Napoli with both those two guys, that we haven't seen the 4-2-2-2 and we saw the Christmas tree first. But we know Carlo's willing to tinker. So I wouldn't be against the Christmas tree either, but you got to have different personnel. You can't have Andre Gomes and Gylfi Sigurdsson behind Dominic Calvert-Lewin. That's madness to me. Yeah. I think it would be interesting, though, if maybe you flipped it around and played a 1-2 up top and put James behind Richarlison and Dominic Calvert-Lewin. I think that'd be an interesting experiment, too, and maybe mix someone like Delphin there as the three mids with Allen and Decore. I don't know. All right, James, you got to pick one. Immediate solution, midfield problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not writing off Andre Gomes to the extent that maybe you are, Ryan. I know, I still think he's a lovely guy. He's a great guy. The problem is similar almost to Tom Davies in a way where he's not an attacking mid. He's not really good on the defensive side of the ball, and he can't really play in a 2-man midfield. So what do you really do with him?
Yeah, stylistically a little different, but the effectiveness in the final
Yes.
third and the defensive third are very questionable.
Yeah, not saying they're similar, but I'm just saying in like their
Similar
utility
problems.
there, you run into the same problems when trying to fit them into various formations. For me, it's gonna be go with the strong defensive pairing of Decore and Allen and play James in front. I really am curious to see what he can do in like a free roam number 10 role, drift wide, provide that link up more frequently. Obviously him and Richarlison have demonstrated a great link up from opposite sides of the pitch. What can they do when James can kind of slide over to that left-hand side and link up with both he and Luka Dean on a regular basis? I think that's a really intriguing idea and something, again, it hasn't really worked the last few matches. We finally got Richarlison back, so we may just see Carlo go back with the lineup and we've picked up some injuries, but the lineup that was so successful for the opening part of the season. But he does have options, and I think, with the personnel that we have coming back, JPG, there's still some unexplored territory as it pertains to the Everton midfield.
I'm going to second that notion. I figured your best three midfielders in the middle are James, Allen, and Decore. Play them, get it sorted out. I think two-man midfield will be easier to organize, I guess, from a defensive standpoint. Sit them and let James do his thing in the middle. And James is not going to duck out of tackles and stuff too. He's got a little bite to him as well, and he likes to play a little deeper anyway. I think that makes sense, and I think he can use the whole field at that point, roam wherever the heck he needs to do. And I think it's a lot easier to make in-game adjustments too when you have two more disciplined, at least defensive mids that can work together. That's my take. I think it would help with build-up too, because everyone's just putting people on Allen and making it harder for us. So I'm with you. I agree. 4-3-3. Let's try it again. Let's change up the personnel a little bit. Two defensive mids, double pivot, away we go. Well, I think that will just about wrap it up for Toffee TV USA this week, coming to you again every week, midweek from now until God knows how long. We brought some stats today till they kick us off. We'd love some feedback, please. Give us a shout. Check out our Discord community. Please check out the American Toffee podcast on a variety of different mechanisms through podcasts. And James, I don't know if you want to take her home or not.
Yeah. So definitely follow us on socials as well at USA Toffee Pod on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Our link will be in the description. Also subscribe to Toffee TV if you're not already. I assume you are if you're watching this, but great stuff on this channel, and we'd hope you check out the pod as well. Until next time, up the Toffees.